All right, everyone, welcome back to the Sober Broker. This is a space where we recover out loud so that someone quietly who's suffering knows they're not alone. I'm Patrick Brooks. I'm a husband, father, broker, and a man who chose sobriety over my own self destruction. And today's episode is about grit, survival, and a decision that has really lasted over 3 decades. Today, we're sitting down with James Young. James grew up in the Bronx, a Catholic school education. Drugs and alcohol were woven into the culture around him just early on, and the club scene has defined his early 20s. Pain was something that he typically ran from, not through, and his loss of his high school sweetheart, loss of friends, and his neighbor, who unfortunately had an overdose at an early age. This all impacted who James was and how he saw the drugs and alcohol. And James went from James, his father, was a retired New York firefighter, and he wore not only a badge of honor, but he's had served a life of service. And obviously just that exposure to that life was very traumatic for him as a kid. And opiates was a part of the picture. Numbing was a part of the picture. But we get to the celebration of it all, where on September 12th in 1995, James made a final decision to alter the trajectory of his entire life. And he stopped using all drugs and alcohol. And now James is a mortgage professional living in the Charlotte region, and you have decades of sobriety. And I know you didn't just get clean, for you. There's a lot of other people in the mixture that you definitely wanted to get clean for. And obviously this episode is not about perfection, because we're all imperfect people who have made mistakes along our lives, including myself. I've made so many mistakes, and this is truly about what happens when a man stops running from the pain and just starts leading through it. And this is the Sober Broker. Welcome on, James.
Patrick, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I definitely appreciate the opportunity. I've been following you a little bit on Facebook, and I just really appreciate your heart and your willingness to share and create something that can make a difference for somebody that's struggling, maybe alone, thinks they're alone, and ashamed that there is a way out.
Yeah, often I feel like we still get closed into this box of, where life should be, what we should be doing. And often, it's hard to escape that box once you're in there. And so I heard this powerful statement that when you recover out loud, you recover for other people who are, suffering in silence. And I think it's part of the journey. I think it's part of going to, either AA meetings, if the 12-step program is, something that you need, or NA, and then Celebrate Recovery. It's very similar to those two programs, but a more biblical sense. And whenever I started going to CR, Celebrate Recovery, and I heard that statement, I was like, wow, that's the one thing that's really stuck through me with all of it is you can obviously be ashamed, of your past and choose to, just kind of put that in the past and keep it there. Or, you can really use it as a tool to continue to make it who you are, and obviously to be able to help other people in the process. So I appreciate that, James. I really do. If you could tell me a little bit more about your story. I know we talked just a little bit about this before and kind of gave you a little bit of an intro, but what was life like growing up in the Bronx during that era?
Well, it was, I'm just going to correct you. We were speaking a little bit before the meeting, and I mentioned the Bronx Tale being an educational video in my neighborhood. But I actually grew up on Staten Island. So I was born in Brooklyn, and I grew up in Staten Island. And it's one of the 5 boroughs. They call it the Forgotten Borough. But there was a lot of people from the other boroughs, specifically Brooklyn, after they built that Verrazano Bridge. Okay. And that mindset was very much alive and well in the 70s and 80s. It still is back in that area in New York. But I grew up with a lot of kids. We were like in a new development. So there were a lot of kids of all different ages. It was a good childhood, but it was also wild. You never knew what was going to happen next. And you were surrounded by people with a certain type of thinking, given where they came from. So I witnessed a lot of things from a young age, things looking one way on the outside, but being different behind the curtain. They used to call it like a racket, like the candy store was the candy store, but they were taking, there was a casino in the back, so it was like a front. So I grew up, really with a lot of fear. You mentioned about my dad. That was a part of me growing up, I could remember really being petrified when he went to work that he was going to die. So I could remember the fear. I could remember never really wanted to miss anything. We played a lot of sports in the street. At that time, it was way before technology like we have today. So
Mhm.
we played, baseball, basketball. We were out all day riding bikes, playing. At that time, it wasn't was underdeveloped. So we would go ring olivio, kick the can, frog hunting. We had like a good life, but there was just always these other things going on that weren't legal, right? For example, so it was just being surrounded. There was a lot of alcohol and drugs in the area that, a lot of people did wind up succumbing to and dying, and I witnessed it firsthand. Didn't stop me, Patrick, but I did witness it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't think that we necessarily process it
Mm.
in a way of like how that specific moment, impacts you. Trauma, I feel like the way it works is, kind of leaves trails throughout your life. You know, if certain things have impacted you, like, fear, for example, often fear becomes somewhat of a motivator, because you think that you have to not be fearful of
Mm.
things. And it's just a part of life is being afraid sometimes. And, as a kid, um, if you're not comforted, in that time, I think that's where it becomes trauma.
I agree.
So, what did, I guess, did for your area, was there like a normal part of what life should have looked like versus kind of like the life that you were living? Does that make sense?
It does. One of the things that I think about, Patrick, is my grandmother. My grandmother was one of the strongest reference points to love that I had in my life.
Mm.
So that was my father's mom. And my grandfather he was in the Battle of the Bulge. He was an orphan. He grew up during the Depression. Now, I didn't understand anything about this. This is all hindsight, like in life. But they were the strongest reference points to love that I ever had in my life, especially my grandmother. And it's actually funny because my grandfather asked me to do something one day and I said no. And my grandmother came to me later in the day and she said, you really hurt grandpa's feelings when you said no to him. And I remember thinking, grandpa has feelings,
Right.
'cause he was like, the last greatest. I mean, he was in World War II. He never talked about it. I never even knew what that meant. Never said I fought in the Battle of the Bulge. But he was, he grew up, he had a tough life. And just the other thing I'll say, he bought me these Pro Ked sneakers, and those weren't what the cool kids were wearing at the time. And I didn't want the sneakers. And growing up, I often look back at that and being like, oh my God, like how spoiled was I? Like, I don't want those sneakers. Meanwhile, the guy grew up in like the Depression. He was an orphan. So just certain things. But I think that was something strong as an example. And the other thing for me was really, um, I did go to Catholic school my whole life. And I got in a lot of trouble. I kind of deserved it. You know what I mean? I was in trouble with a way of thinking all the way back. I went to public school for a very short period of time and they transferred me in kindergarten to Catholic school. And in public school, I was pasting macaroni on construction paper. And when I went to this Catholic school, they had like a workbook. They were doing work, like I don't know. And Miss Ann, I still remember, she asked, who wants to do another page in the workbook? And I remember it looked to me like everybody raised their hand but me. I don't know if that's true, but a bunch of kids raised their hand. But you had to bring the book up to her. And I brought the book up and she said, James, you didn't do the page. And I said, I know. You asked who wanted to do another page. I didn't
Mm.
raise my hand.
I didn't want to.
Right. So I went right to the corner. But the point is, in that school, there was something that I remember from a young kid. I remember being in church, like during school days, there were times they would take you to church. And I remember experiencing peace in that church. And I
Mm.
also remember experiencing that peace in the woods, right? So it was like in nature, and I felt it as the same presence, if you will. And I did. I always had a belief in God, but that was a big thing. Not that I followed, you know what I mean, what I thought he wanted to do. For me, I really wanted a magician. I want to do something bad and say, God, don't don't let that be. And he's like, James, give me a break. That's what you just did. So I think those were some of the experiences early on that I did have access to that really made a powerful difference for me, especially on my sobriety journey. And later when we get to that, I'll share like what happened to me, like right from the beginning, specifically with that school that I went to as a kid when I came, when God intervened and brought me into recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can go and dive right into it, James.
Okay. Well, one of the interesting things was I went to Catholic grammar school, Catholic high school, and then I went to a Catholic college too. So I was always in some kind of, even though I wasn't spiritually well, there was a sense of the presence of something greater. There was the presence of God, like it was there at the very nature. But one of the things that happened on the journey was when I wound up 95 through a series of events that I'm not going to get too into detail, but I will tell you that, at that time in my life, I didn't want to die, but I was petrified to live. And I didn't think it was possible. Like, I wasn't looking to get sober, Patrick. I was looking for the pain to stop. And I definitely didn't want to do opiates because I was strung out. I mean, I was passing out, coming to, I was sick. I needed something not to be sick. It wasn't about getting high anymore. It was about not being sick.
Yeah.
And I wound up in South Oaks, which is a detox in Amityville, Long Island. Then I went to Arms Acres, and a lot of things happen on the journey, and we'll see what gets covered. But anyway, when I came out of that rehab, I did go right back to that church that I had known from a child. And the Monsignor in the church was sober 16 years. And he would talk about it often from the front of the homily. He'd have index cards and he would tell stories, and not just stories about alcoholism, whatever, but they were tied in there a lot of times.
Mhm.
And they had like this folk music band. There was a 7 o'clock at night mass on Sunday. And I would go to that mass. And then there was, like you mentioned, there's so much support if you're looking for help in sort of community. All you have to do is Google it. There's all these different communities that you're not alone, that people that have been in the same hole have found their way out. So that church was connecting to Monsignor Jeff was a catalyst in my sobriety. And he passed away a few years ago. He had a heart attack in Florida. I went to the funeral, even though I was in North Carolina at the time. And so many people on this journey God has used to get me to where I am today. But I don't know if he wasn't there, if I would have made it, because he was that impactful on me. I wound up eventually, like even inside of the church, he would have healing masses. And he was a charismatic priest. Like this, that's not like the norm, maybe in the Catholic structure that you see that. And I wound up catching people, like being a catcher if they're rested in the spirit. I wound up working with the children in the church after that in a teen program. And I actually proposed to my wife at the end of a mass in front of 500 people. She worked for a jeweler, and somebody slipped that I had gotten the ring from the jeweler, and they thought I already proposed. So she knew I was going to propose. So I mean that was like a big centering person, and really going right back to, for the first time in my life, to a deeper experience, not just belief and relationship with God. And I really I am here in my life in spite of myself, not because of myself. It was 100% God's grace, love, and mercy is why I'm talking to you today. And I used to think grace was something like, oh, that's what happened in 1995, but it's not. Grace is happening right now, and it's always at play. And I just, one of the things that was important to me was to surrender. And I had that surrender, and I wish I could tell you, oh, yeah, just surrender and it's over. I feel like my life, I'm just living in between surrenders. I'm just waiting for the next surrender, Patrick, because it's coming. Clean and sober is fantastic, but life is not stopping. The assault.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So you mentioned surrender. What does surrender mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think that I've come to the end of myself and can continue to come to the end of myself because for me, like addiction, alcoholism, whatever it is, that lives in the bottle.
Mhm,
But the alcoholism and addiction lives in my mind and my spirit.
mhm.
That's why it's so like I didn't understand that. Like when I'm like, why are people here for decades still coming and like helping people do whatever it is because it never really goes away. The root of the disease of addiction for me is in selfishness,
Yeah,
you know?
that's a good way of putting it.
So it's being willing to whatever my perception or expectation is in life, being attached to it has to go that way really puts me at odds. And when I'm specifically talking, I'm talking about to the people closest to me. I'm very good out in the community, Patrick. I'm going to be good on the podcast, at the store, but the people closest to me, that's where I have to continue to surrender and let go of what it is that I think and really just give people what I want, which I wanted my whole life was to be accepted and to be loved, Patrick. That's what I wanted. I would have said it was to be cool, right, as a kid, but it was really to be accepted and to be loved and bringing that kind of acceptance and love. I don't really have that ability on my own. I need God. That's just my experience. I don't care what word you use. A lot of times you see people, maybe they had bad experiences. I always think that you can replace the word God with the word love and it will work.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jesus was a pure example of what, love and all really the fruits of the spirit were. And so that's often what I'd speak about. I do intermediate teachings at my church now for the youth, fifth and sixth graders, kind of in that transition period where, your body starts changing, your interest starts changing. And so it's really important to me because I think that's really when I started kind of making a downward shift as well. It was right in that fifth and sixth grade period. But during the intermediate, I really like to talk about the fruits of the spirit and just being able to exude those things throughout your life, trying to find ways to be able to express love, express graciousness, express kindness, express, gratitude and all these things that incorporate, you know, everything that Jesus brought down to earth to be able to fight against, the seven deadly sins. And I really believe that, God has a really unique place in my life too, because I grew up going to church. My parents, were very religious, but it was also kind of one of those things to where as soon as you got home, you didn't necessarily feel the spirit. So like at church, when they brought me to church, it was obviously very all encompassing. I felt the Lord, I felt the spirit, and I really loved going to church. But then when we got home, it's kind of like, you know, we stopped kind of living like that. There was alcoholism in my house, there was fighting, there was yelling, there was, my dad had an attitude issue that gratefully he's, overcome through his years. But it taught me a lot about how I holster my anger and frustration. And anger and frustration was a huge identity for me for a long time. It's how I protected myself. It's how I shielded myself from embarrassment or fear, anxiety. So yeah, there's a lot to life. I think that we kind of learn as we go through, and obviously the impacts of either churches, people, places, things at an early on stage really teach us a lot about ourselves. And kind of as we age, we think about those things differently. Kind of what we were speaking about before about perspective.
And I think that for me, the illusion or delusion is that I have some kind of ultimate control. And there's certain things I can control my attitude maybe, and, certain things I do and don't do, but I really I don't have the control I would like to have
Hmm.
outcomes of things. So I think a lot of times that is the surrender. And for me personally, I also struggle with like an unbelievably profound arrogance, like that I know what's best. Well, like Patrick, let me tell you, but you know what you could do to fix that? But meanwhile, I keep failing forward in my own life over and over and over. You talked about that in the beginning. It's like, I'm not you know, here because of me. I'm here in spite of me. And
Right.
it's not because I've gotten anything right. It's because I just keep getting back up. And, you know, surrender has just become a way of life. and it's action and surrender. But ultimately, if you would have met me in the early days and they said, look, you have to bet money. How much money? You have $20, you have to bet it. Do you think that he's going to stay on this journey or not? It would have been a good bet from what I was saying to bet that I wouldn't be here. So I wasn't thinking, I didn't even understand so many things I didn't understand. It was really that love and that mercy. And then God has worked, we talked about, through the people. Like hopefully through this podcast, right? One person, if one person sees this podcast and something resonates, and then it has them take a step out towards getting better. I mean, what's better than that? I prefer that to happen and not know, right? Because it's not going to be because of me.
Mhm.
It's just, I feel like everything's a divine appointment, Patrick.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah. So in your life, I mean, when have you seen, that true like divine intervention from God? Things had to happen that way for things to happen this way today. So
Yeah.
can
I
you?
mean, I'll tell you, I like stories. I'm just going to tell you stories, and I have a lot of them, and we're not
Yeah.
going to have time for all of them. But I will tell you, when I was in rehab, I went to my counselor and I said, pretty much, I didn't say it exactly this way, but this is what I was saying. I was saying, I know what you're telling the rest of these people. You could tell me, what is it that I have to do? And I remember he said to me, you have to pray. And I remember thinking, this guy just blew me off. He doesn't know either. That's what I thought when he said that to me. And I got out of rehab and I had gone to an outpatient program, and it was the first night of outpatient program. And before that detox and rehab, I had access to somebody that I would get pills from every Thursday and every Sunday. No matter how many pills I got on Thursday, I was out on Sunday. No matter how many pills I got on Sunday, I was already in withdrawal again by Thursday. Now that person hadn't seen me after years of that. I had no choice but to do that. After years, he hadn't seen me in about 21 days, I think I was away, something like that. And he was near where the outpatient was. And the lie that I told myself was, I'm going to stop and I'm going to get one Valium to help me sleep. That's what I said. And I got off the highway and I didn't ask God, I demanded. I said, God, you have to help me because I'm going. And I went. And the guy came out and he started talking to me, and I said, do you have any? And he said, yeah. And another guy that I knew, I'll just say his first name, Joe, and I knew this guy from college, he interrupted the meeting. And they started talking, and he said, come back in a half hour. I had outpatient. So I went to outpatient, and I never went back. 9 years later, I get, however often, that magazine from St. John's. And I threw the magazine away. When I tell you, it's probably about 9 years of I never opened it once. I would see the magazine and throw it in the garbage. For some reason, I flipped through the magazine. And at the end of the magazine, there is a rattle, which is any alumni that have had a baby. And then there's 2 wedding rings, and it's anybody that's been married. And then the last thing is a cross, and that's alumni that have died. And that guy died 9 years later of a drug overdose.
Joe or the?
Joe,
Okay.
the guy that interrupted the meeting,
Hmm.
on a prayer that I didn't even believe, that I didn't ask, that I demanded, because I was going and I went. And that was just one. I have more than that intervention, that I was going to do something to hurt myself, and it just was not allowed to happen.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, divine intervention, I think, can happen in, many different ways, whether we see it in that moment or not. Maybe it took you 9 years to be able to see that,
Mhm.
that moment was, an impactful moment for you because you never went back to go get those pills. Or maybe you saw it immediately. It doesn't really matter, but
No, it was hindsight.
yeah. Okay.
It was hindsight. It wasn't that it hit me at a deep, deep level. Obviously, when I looked at the magazine 9 years later, is that
Yeah.
it hit me at that level. And that wasn't the only experience that I had. I'll just share one other thing. I had a lot of denial with alcohol in the beginning of my recovery journey because I associated my pain more with drugs, specifically the pills. Like that was because I was, It was a physical, total addiction to those pills. And I had a lot of denial with alcohol. And I had this guy that was a mentor to me. His name was Vietnam Bob. He really wasn't that nice to me, but he had saved my life. I told him that he was trying to brainwash me, and he told me my brain needs to be scrubbed. That's what he said, and he wasn't wrong. But anyway, I was on in recovery for about 8 months, and he came up from behind me and he whispered in my ear, and he said, "You still didn't put the drink down yet," and I wasn't drinking. But he was talking about I had a reservation, like a mental reservation. He could hear it in the things that I was saying. I was 26 years old at this time, so I was fairly young to be on this journey. And I went to a I went to a gathering, and this woman shared a story about her son, and the story was that her son was clean and sober, and it was Mother's Day, and guys pulled up in a pickup truck, and they had a cooler of beers, and they offered him a beer. One beer, what is that gonna do, right? It may even been a Coors Light, that's what I like to say. I don't know what kind of beer it was. But he took the beer, and that night he shot heroin and died. She said, though, "What do you think killed him? Was it the beer or was it the heroin?" And just in that moment, like the denial, this was in the moment when that happened, shattered. I just saw the truth, I heard the truth, and I knew the truth. That that's really who I am. I always drank for effect. I don't want a glass of wine with dinner personally, you know what I mean? I know what happens to me once I alter my mind. That's my truth. So again, many years later, I wind up on the phone with this woman and I share the story and I say, "Did you have a son on Mother's Day?" All little things. And she says, "Yes, yes, yes." And I said to her, "Well, I just want to thank you because you saved my life." And she said to me, "My son's name was James." And that was many years after that I had that experience.
Mm.
So and anybody that I've watched gotten better, things like that have happened. It's providence, it's being protected, it's whatever you want to label it. Seen it over and over again. And matter of fact, I've never seen anybody get better because of them. It's usually been in spite of them and through grace, whether
Yeah.
they acknowledge it or not.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah. It kind of makes me think about, my past and, um, yeah, I mean, I didn't thinking back on it, I wasn't truly like, I wouldn't say like addicted to many things, but I had a very curious, um, very outwardly approach to drugs and alcohol. Like I did them every day, but I
Mhm,
wasn't, I didn't get physically addicted to pills, mostly because when I was right after high school, we had a huge epidemic with these Percocet 30s that, and they call them blues, that kind of swept the nation. And very similar to like the Oxycontin phase, this was probably not nearly as bad, but I mean, I had in a matter of 2 years, I had probably around like 9 friends who had passed away from just overdoses and things like that. And friends who've gotten really, really close who got terrible off on addiction, but were able to get clean. And I was dealing pot at the time and dabbling with a bunch of other stuff, hallucinogens, but never painkillers. I never wanted to be a source for that from other people, despite how much money you could make on it or whatever. So my road to recovery was full of, you know, sin and bad decisions and constantly supplying people with something to be able to kind of keep them down. And whenever I got clean, it definitely was not for me, but it was definitely in spite of what I was becoming because those two are not the same in my opinion because you know I didn't necessarily do it just for me. Like I did it because I was tired of living the life that I was living. And at the same time, me and my wife had a child and things were not going well in that aspect. We actually got divorced. We spent 7.5 years apart. And then in the midst of us both getting sober, something had happened, and my daughter and my wife's other son, his name's Malachi, and my daughter's name's Olivia. They basically saw something traumatic where a neighbor had gotten stabbed, and And so she was like, come over to the house and just help them, fall asleep in bed, and then you can leave. And I was like, okay. Well, she didn't know this, but at the time, I was in the midst of my probably worst season of my life because I was living out of my car. I was sleeping in the LA Fitness parking lot, and I was, like literally, I mean, showering, shaving, doing everything I needed to do to get ready in the day at LA Fitness, going to a coffee shop or my office and working and then coming back. Like that was my routine because I was doing just enough of, drugs and alcohol to spend the money that I had, but also keep me in a place to where I was okay with the life I was living. But once I experienced that, and came back, and my ex and I, Megan, started kind of reconnecting. She was already sober by like 3 months. So I was like, well, why don't we go grab a drink? And she's like, I actually don't drink anymore. And I was like, okay, well, this is weird. yeah, this is how we always bonded, that's how we built like our relationship on. And then she was like, you should come to a meeting with me. And so I was like, nah, it's not for me. I'll stay home and watch the kids. And I just stayed at her place for a little bit. And then God just started working in our life. And things started kind of coming back together. All those old feelings started coming back. And I mean, I physically like rejected. I was like, God, I am not doing this again. Like, I don't want to go through it. We had uh, basically a issue with, she had an affair, and that kind of put a huge void in our relationship. And um loyalty is huge for me, and so that was really difficult for me to kind of move on from. um and we never really got along since, but this brought us back together. Sobriety brought us back together. So there's so many great things that came from just the opportunity of putting yourself last, and realizing that like this disease and this way of thinking and the motives and the stories that you tell yourself is all for you, but putting it in the past is for everyone else so that they can not only experience who you truly are, and you too, but it's not for you do it for other people. So in spite of who you are and how you've been acting, I think it's truly impactful when people decide to make that decision to get clean and change their life, because everyone's lives around them change, especially if you're a father or a business leader or whatever the case may be. You know, that story just creates a huge narrative shift in so many other people's lives.
It's beautiful. Now, are you with your ex, or you
Yeah.
so you got remarried?
Mhm.
Okay, that's I just wanted to make sure. I thought that's what happened, but I just want beautiful. And then one of the things that you spoke about in there was so good what you said, but it made me think of one thing about forgiveness, right? Because you talked about being hurt or whatever. And that's, you know, I've gotten to meet in my lifetime. I met Stephen McDonald was a New York City police officer who was shot and paralyzed in Central Park by a 16-year-old kid that had stolen a bike. Like it wasn't like a big charge. And the kid pulled out a gun, he shot him, and he fully paralyzed him. And at the time, his wife was pregnant with their son, and which means he was never going to be able to hold his son or throw a ball to his son or all of those things, right? And Stephen McDonald forgave the kid that shot him. And he also went and spoke about forgiveness. And I got to meet him a couple of times in my life. I met him at an event, and I actually went to his funeral because he left that much of an impression on me as far as a demonstration of forgiveness, right? And it just made, you know what I mean? It really, you talked about surrender. We were talking about surrender. And that's another thing for me. Like when I'm hurt, I want to hurt you worse than you just hurt me,
Yeah.
right? So I don't have the ability to forgive myself or even forgive other people. My experience, whether you call it God or call it grace, whatever it is, I have not been able to forgive or continue to forgive definitely myself and others without that connection. So that was just, I just thought about it just listening to your story because that's been it's very difficult to be free walking around with unforgiveness. And I know that forgiveness is such a challenging thing for myself and for many people.
Yeah. But, once I think once you step into Because I mean, we have forgiveness in all kinds of senses, right? Like a friend, stole $5 from you, I forgive you. You have parents who maybe divorced and impacted you in a certain way. It's like, okay, well, I understand that you guys had these feuds. I forgive you both. But when you have something that deeply impacts you personally from like a level of, like if you have these principles and pillars that you believe in, loyalty, trust, and whatever the case may be, like, but loyalty was a huge one for me because I saw my parents get divorced and I was like, never will I ever get married to someone, make that decision, and then choose to back out. But it happened shortly after. And once you have something like that happens and you truly do forgive that person, I mean, there's a huge, huge wave of change that happens from that. Just speaking from experience of, you know, consciously making the decision to forgive her because again, whenever I mean, she came to me crying, wanting to reunite and restore our marriage, and I was like, nope, like I'm good. And I just felt like that hate and that anger and that, contempt just continued to build because I was choosing not to just drop it and let it go. But once I did, not only did I get sober, but just a wide variety of things continued to change in my life. I mean, I went from making not a lot of money in real estate to making over six figures. I went a lot, from always having to put on the mask to be able to get business or to feel like I was successful to just being who I was, owning the parts of my life that I was trying to hide because I felt ashamed or, so not only did that strike forgiveness within our relationship, but also it helped me forgive me for my role in it all.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Life is crazy. I think about all the stuff that, I've experienced in my 35 years. And I mean, there's so many ways that I look back and, we talked about divine intervention earlier that I see God, just working in my life and not knowing it was him the whole time, but he was there.
It's like the footprints poem.
Yeah.
It's a footprints. Yeah, it's really beautiful, Patrick.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Thank
sharing all that with me too. I love listening to you. It was really awesome.
Yeah, brother. Yeah. I mean, my story's a little bit different. Obviously, just because I started a podcast about not just addiction, but, really about the journey from what got you into that place and what got you out and what are you doing now, to make your life more purposeful and how are you living your life that's differently than, the past. And so, yeah, I think mine's a little bit different just because I've never had any like hardcore addictions, but I mean, mine was just all trauma responses to life and kind of what brought me there. And I also was a very arrogant and ignorant kid. I was athletic, I was good looking, I was, popular. I hung out with the most popular kids in school. And so I had this ego about me that thought I'd never fail, never get in trouble, never, those things would never happen to me. And little by little, God was like, hey, I'll show you.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the funny thing about humility is life has a way of humbling me over and over again, you know, coming to the end of myself.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, yeah, addiction and trauma, they shape a lot about you, and you don't really realize those things until maybe it's too late, or not too late, but it's to the point where it negatively impacts you. So yeah, it's the humility that comes along with it is somewhat humorous,
Yes.
definitely in like yeah. So tell me about kind of where you're at now, James. I mean, we talked about your past. We talked
Yeah.
about, kind of things that led you down the path that you went. What are you doing today? How does your life look? And how obviously, I mean, your kids have never seen you, drunk or messed up. So that's a blessing. But
Yep.
just tell me about, how your life looks and whether or not you ever thought it would look this way.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when you first come into the recovery, communities, they'll say things like, if you wrote down what you wanted to get out of this, you'd be selling yourself short.
Mm.
And I could tell you, I never could have written down the things I experienced because I didn't even know they existed when I got here. So I never could have written them down. For me, I spend a lot of my time just staying grounded. Meditation is a big part of my life right now. I've done a lot of things over the years, but over the past almost 2 years now, I have a meditation practice that is kind of slowing me down and making me more awake to seeing what it is that where it is I could bring love. And I was just sharing this with somebody. It's, if this was a meter of joy went this way and sadness went this way, meditation has expanded it both ways to be able to be with profound joy and really not based on anything externally, just based internally. Also, be able to be, which I never was good at in my life. I didn't want to feel anything uncomfortable, but to be able to be with profound sadness as well. Um, Really, the most important thing is looking to see what it is I can contribute. How to fulfill my purpose, I guess, is really what I'm looking at now. Is like, how do you fulfill? What does God want me to do? And where does he want me to go? There's the firefighter in Chapel, Michael Judge, you could look this up. He was one of the first casualties in 9/11. He was the fire department chapel, and he was a Franciscan, and he was in the recovery community, and he has a prayer, and the prayer is, God, take me where you want me to go. Let me meet who you want me to meet. Let me say what you want me to say, and keep me out of your way, is the prayer. You can look that up online. And I find a lot of my time being spent thinking about that, and an enormous amount of time really focusing on, like you said, home, my wife, my daughter, like they live with me. My son Brandon is 8. I met him when he was 8 years old. So I'm not his biological father, but I'm a dad to him, and, bringing it to him, as bringing that love to him as well. That's been, we didn't even get into it, nor do we have time. That's been, he's had his own struggles that have impacted my family greatly. I'd love to come and do another time in the future. I'll come back
Love it.
because I have a lot of stories and different things.
Yeah.
But I think that that's really, even in business, you talk about, being in this space, and most people, this is the most money that they're going to spend on anything, and most people have a relationship to money and with money. And there's a lot of fear that comes up for people here. And this is more than buying a house. It's where they're going to create a home, where they're going to raise their kids. Like on my end, it's a lot of paperwork. I'm like, I could care less about the paperwork. I need it, but it really is walking people through this process and taking as much stress out of it on the professional side, and really looking for what's next in my life to continue to grow inside my business and outside of my business. And service is a big, part of it for me too. I go into a treatment center once a week and, volunteer there. And, you
You do
know,
that currently?
I do. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. And it's like one of the highlights of my week because I know what it's like to sit in a place like that. And, the humility of it, Patrick, is if I don't take care of myself, if I'm lucky, I'll make it back to a treatment center. Like I don't have anything handled. I'm just practicing, all of these spiritual principles in my life. Despite my humanness and falling short, I just keep practicing it. I lead a meditation every third week, and you've inspired me because one of the things I didn't set it up yet is I'm going to offer a weekly, on virtual guided meditation that I lead to people, entrepreneurs. It doesn't have to be realtors and mortgage people, just entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
How do you stay more present in your life and in your business?
I love that.
And
I mean, it's
you got it, you got it. Because that's the thing too. It's I want my family to get the best of me, not the rest of me. So even working a lot on structures of how to structure my day to be most effective, to take care of myself, to take care of my business, and yet really have time to spend with my family. We're going to a concert in Atlanta next week overnight. So it's just an overnight, and we're going to go to the aquarium in Atlanta,
the
which
Ripley's.
really excited about. And I hear it's like one of the best aquariums.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good one.
Yeah. So it's really that's been a big part of my life, and really connecting with people. Relationships is where the real joy is for me. And like even this, like I just feel so much more connected to you we talked on the phone once and I see what you're doing. Like, this isn't going to be, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be on the podcast, but I'll be looking to stay connected with you and to you as we walk on this journey.
100%, man. Yeah, I think part of the beauty of technology is to be able to connect with people that you wouldn't necessarily be able to connect with on a regular basis. And so, I mean, I've posted, whenever we do these podcasts, I not only post it on YouTube, but I cut it up in segments and post it on TikTok and Instagram. And of course, it's linked into Facebook and threads and whatnot. But the outreach that I've gotten just from random people saying like, "Hey, this is awesome. Like, I love what you're doing. Here's my sobriety day." I've just had a ton of outreach for people who, stories I would never hear of, people I would never know about, just due to the fact that like, you just kind of took an action of putting stuff online and then people, saw what you're doing and it kind of, is an attraction piece to the idea that, life isn't just, it's not the end of the road, when you're dealing with those things. It's honestly, it's quite opposite. It's the beginning. And yeah, I see that in relationships. I don't see this as just one podcast with you. If your goals are to build out, a meditation thing, I would love to be a part of that and work with you on what we can do to, make that the most impactful. Just because I've had some, personal coaches that I've hired in the past, life coaches, financial coaches. And through that, I've learned a lot about just, it's humbling because, again, the arrogance minded side of you said, like, oh, I'm fine with money, like I make enough now, I budget, I take care of my bills, like everything's paid. But at the end of the day, the financial side is a huge aspect of life. And it's about stewardship, and it's a lesson about, being able to not only receive the things that you work for, but also what you're going to do with it. And I see
Absolutely.
that so differently than the efforts that we make in life to be able to impact other people.
It's weird. That's where joy lives for me too. I've never been joyful. I've been happy about things I've gotten if I wanted it, but it's fleeting.
Right.
But joy is really in what I could give. And just going back to my past, they told me that in kindergarten, it's in giving you receive. And I thought they were trying to trick me, Patrick. I'm like, I know it's in getting you receive. What are you kidding me? And that really has been, they were telling me the truth. It really is in what I've been able to give in life to people that are the things that bring joy.
Yeah.
So
Man, that's awesome. So tell me about your job now. How you mentioned about like the fact that you're not just, getting people into homes and, getting them set up with the best financial situation, but I mean, it truly is a stewardship for you now, no?
it is. It's really being an advisor to people and doing really what's best for them and giving them options for their life. Because this is the first step in the opportunity for people, some people, to create generational wealth. So it's really way beyond a transaction for me. It
Yeah.
really is about the people and what is it that we could do and how could we structure it and how could we walk you through this process that people brings up a lot of fear in people because most people do it maybe once, twice, three times. Most people, there's people that are investors, but they're going to do it so few times in their life. What is the experience going to be? And the things that have come up in stress and what I've been able to provide and things that people are going on in their life that they'll share with me. One of the things I don't ever say this to my clients, but I pray for my clients. Like when I come into contact with people, I start like praying for them and not like praying for them that there's a problem, just lifting them up that they're guarded and protected. Like that's a big thing for me. People are dealing with so much in life. There's so much stresses in life. If I could offer anything along the way that will make a difference for them, I love it. That's the part of the, you know what I mean, the process that I love.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think about stewardship, I think about how we're talking about ownership, but not possession of. Like
Yeah,
nothing that we have is truly ours, right? Like at the end of the day, our life is short. Time goes by so quick. I mean, I think about when I was a kid, thinking that my dad in his mid 30s was old. Like he doesn't have a lot of time left. And I'm like, now that I'm 35, I'm like, wow, like I I don't really have too much time, but it just kind of makes you value every single day, every single conversation you have with people. And yeah, the perspective shifts from a lack of to, an abundance of. Like we have so much time to be able to make a difference. I mean, we've been on, this call for now 53 minutes, and I'm extremely impacted by just your perspective of life and, how you're choosing to take your path and make it not about yourself anymore, but about other people and just, continually to positively impact them through your stewardship of your job. And biblically, stewardship starts in Genesis. Um, God gives man dominion, but not ownership. We're caretakers of what he entrusts in us. And that applies directly to our work. So whether you're a firefighter, a mortgage broker, a real estate agent, you're not just closing deals or running into buildings, like you're managing that trust in who you are. And Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men. And that for me changes everything because, everything in today's society is reduced down to, individual efforts by man. And but everything's spiritual at the same light. You can see it, behind the scenes, kind of how things are. And, your job now isn't about your ego. It's not about status or proving something to anyone else. It's about representing, you know, who you are as a person. And before sobriety, work for me at least became an identity, and it created a sense of a very transactional based relationships with other people. Like, to be able to put food on the table, I have to sell a house. Okay, how do I do that? And it became more about, me than it was the other people. But once I got sober, I started realizing like how empty that is, and how, when you put other people before yourself, alignment really starts happening in your life. Your identity shifts. You start speaking the truth, you start serving differently, and you start really putting other people first.
It's beautiful. Exact. And that's a life worth living, not the, next one. Harvard did a study and they asked like longevity, like what was a common denominator, and it was deep, meaningful relationships.
Mm,
And having that, my experience is, God doesn't come from me, he comes through me. And there's always the next opportunity to, you never know what you're going to say, what people are dealing with that could make a difference just by you being there. Sometimes it's just listening, Patrick. It's not even like an answer. Just people don't even have the space to listen to people sometimes. That makes a big difference.
yeah, it's true. It's true. James, is there anything else that you wanted to really share today?
Well, I just want to share gratitude because that's another, just way of life. I was recently speaking to a guy and we were telling our stories to each other. It was part of an exercise and a meditation weekend. And the guy was from another country and he was like, yeah, it was hard for us to get to school, but then I got a bike and it was like 13 miles each way to school, is what he said. And then later on, way in his story, he came to America, he was working 18 hours a day, all of these things. And he said, and then things got better and I was able to eat what I wanted. And it just hit me like, I have so much to be grateful for. It never even occurred to me. You eat what you wanted for the first time. The guy was like, who knows how old? He was an adult. So really focusing on all the things that I have to be grateful for, I've been blessed with, and really having that be the focus of my life and not focusing on just other external things that really aren't going to make a difference. So
Right.
I'm just grateful to, to get to know you, to be on this podcast, that certain things I shared with you prompted you to share and be present to things about what God has done for you. That was like my favorite part today, was listening to you, Mike, and was like, this is what God did for me. He
Yeah.
changed my heart. I was living in my car, like just, I don't know. It's like that to me over and over again, seeing the hand of love and the hand of God. So if anybody that's comes across this podcast, my prayer is it makes a difference for you, and that your future is not determined on your past. There's a whole new way of life out there. There's communities of people, and there's forgiveness, love, and a new way of life. All you have to do is reach out and ask for it.
Yeah. Well, James, I'm grateful for your story too, and for you being able to just open up and be vulnerable and just be on this podcast today. Gratitude isn't just, looking back and, thankful for where we are. It's really about recognizing where God has carried you through and
Yeah.
what he's building in you today. So yeah, couldn't have said it any better for anyone listening today. If you're in the middle of chaos, if you're running from the silence and you're tired of just white knuckling your life, just hear this: surrender isn't the end. I think James' testimony is a great story to be able to listen to about surrender. It's not just becoming who you're meant to be. It's about losing, or sobriety isn't about losing a part of you. It's about gaining clarity, discipline, and purpose through the path that you've taken. And gratitude keeps you grounded. I mean, the fact that no one is self-made, you're breathing today, there's grace. If you're listening today, there's opportunity. And if you're struggling today, there's certainly hope for you. Uh, so obviously, this podcast is not about honoring, the fall or really glorifying the past, but it's to point out, what God has carried you through to be able to make it here today. And again, when we recover out loud and we tell these stories, they're here to enlighten other people, to be able to share the fact that if you are struggling, today's not the end. And this is truly what the Sober Broker is about. And I would love to have you on the episode again, James.
I would love to come back, Patrick. I look forward to staying connected with you too. It was an honor to be here. Really a great start of the day. I hope the kids enjoy the snow today.
Yeah, me too. And the honor is all mine as well, brother. So we appreciate you, and I'll be praying for you. And when it comes down to this meditation thing, let's definitely stay connected.
Sounds good, Patrick.
All right, James, you take care.
You too, brother.